Okay, it's 5:01. Awesome.
Okay, we're live and ready to go.
Extra option.
Mr. King, are you gonna chair this meeting?
I don't think I can, so that's what I was going to step and say. Ms. Reese, would you chair the meeting?
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense since he's remote.
Okay, welcome to the Thursday, 9/2021 Board of Education special meeting. Can you please call the roll? Oh,
Yes.
I don't.
Ready? Okay, Mrs. Mansfield,
Here.
Mr. Elam,
Here.
Mrs. Sebastian,
Here.
and Mrs. Reese.
Present.
He's going to say it again here in a second.
It's a special.
Okay, next up is the K-5 building project discussion. Discussion commence. So Laura, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Joining us this evening are representatives from Garmin Miller and also Peterson Construction. We have Laura Little, project manager, Eric Baltzell, primary representative from Garmin Miller, and then also Mr. Glenn Renner from Peterson Construction. They are here this evening to talk about some of the preliminary costs that have come out with the K-5 building project and also the football stadium. So at this time, I will turn it over to Laura, and she can kind of walk us through the budget, the numbers on where we are at, and then some of the options that we have with the project.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so we met the other day to look at some BE options, the preliminary options that we have on the project. Right now, option A is looking at how do we, without cutting square footage, how do we get the project within budget? And it's a lot of items. I know it does cause some heartache with some of those items, but just what are all of the options that we can possibly come up with and to try and get the building on budget. As you know, costs have gone up. Joist and deck is a major contributor to the cost overruns right now. That's $1 million more than what we would have expected from last year this time. But that's just one example. There's other examples that are adding to the overall cost increases right now where we're at. So that is option A, looking at how do we possibly count, to get within our budget, all of those items that we could possibly cut to get in our budget. And then also some other funding sources to add to the project budget to try and help offset. Option B, though, was an item taking a look at, do we cut square footage? I know that's a big issue. You want to build all the square footage that you possibly can right now for the K-5 building. But do you look at possibly cutting that square footage so you don't have to sacrifice so much on everything else? And I'm not just talking about making it nice and adding embellishments. Some of those things were mechanical and electrical items that could cause, it would be something that would help with energy efficiencies for you in the future. If we look at cutting that now, yes, we do save the money now, but you do spend more in energy for the life of the building. So that's the trade-off. Do you cut some square footage now, knowing you can build it later and not have to cut so many things out of the project as what we had in option A? So option B, we had looked at a couple different things. Do we take off the square footage for like maybe, and we were looking at square footage. So one easy area that you could build back are the kindergarten classrooms. Another area that we looked at is the whole 4-5 pod and building that back later. After our meeting on Tuesday, while we were talking on Tuesday, it was asked, well, what if we just built half of the 4-5 pod? So basically build the 4th grade, but not build the 5th grade, knowing you can add that on later. So that was an item that we came up with during that meeting, put together some costs on that, what that square footage would be. I know that your board members also asked what would be a possible cost just to put a shell on and not outfit the interior. And so a cost was provided on that as well in an email today. So that's kind of roughly the two options. One of the other items that we were looking at is with the stadium project. Do we have the stadium project take on a portion of the cost of utilities? Like we have right now, just as we were looking at where do we put the utilities, all of the utilities for the stadium also service the K-5 building, but the cost of that was 100% borne by the K-5. Do we have the athletics also share a portion of that cost? Like the sanitary lift station, the size of that is more based on the size of the stadium. That's going to have more occupants than what your K-5 would build. K-5 building is going to have. So that's why that is sized for the stadium. Should that bear the brunt of the cost? Maybe. So one of the items we were looking at is shifting over some funds from the stadium project to the K-5 to help offset for these utilities.
Laura,
Yes.
yeah, I haven't seen it personally, but I saw on my phone that the price of lumber is going way down. It's down 68% or something like that. I know there's not very much lumber in a school building, but what about, and I also know that the price of steel has gone way up, and that's the joists and the decks you're talking about. But do we have to do these bids now? This has to be done now, and we can't wait to see if it's going to go down in the near future or anything like that?
Right. So we go through the process, and part of the process is that we do different checks. So we did this at schematic design, and we got to check, like, here's our design and what's the cost going to be. And then we have to bring it back into budget. This is that next step. We're at design development. We got to get it back within budget, because then our next step that we're going to have is going out to bid with an early site package. Now, so when we get the project on budget, then we all agree, yes, we feel good about what we have right now, and we feel comfortable going out to bid with an early site package. So that way you can get use of the rest of this fall and building up the building pad and getting moving on the project, so that when we finish the documents at the end of the year, that Peterson can go ahead and start foundations first thing in the spring. So this is that next step. Are you going to have, we're not going to have a hard bid until like January timeframe is when you're going to have those hard bids. Right now, all of these numbers are estimates. So we need to get the project on budget and feel comfortable with where we're at. But you won't get any of those hard bids until like January. But this is that first step and we need to get on budget so that we can feel comfortable about going out for the early site package. So some things for that. You know, like you said, if costs come down, you already have an alternate list of items that you've already identified that we would really like to have in this building. Right now, everything on that alternate list is not in the building. That's if the prices come down, those are some things that you could consider. Now, those items that are on option A and option B, could those be considered an alternate instead of cut completely out of the project? Absolutely. Can everything on option A be an alternate? No. But this is where, if you decide to cut square footage and then keep some of those items in the project, we could still look at some of those being an alternate, that if the prices come in really great, you get to take them. But if we have so many of those items, like from option A, if so many of those items are on your alternate list, you'll never get to your original alternate list that you had at SD. That's my fear for you.
Laura, can I, this is Julie. I just wanted to ask one question about the athletic. If we move part of the cost of the utilities to the athletic project, we lose the OFCC matching 80%. If we do that when CFAP kicks in, because that's an LFI project, or we still get it?
The maximum amount of funds that you will get is listed on the co-funded project. We're over that. So you will only get ever the maximum amount of co-funded funds. We're over that right now. We're trying to bring it back to within that budget. So I don't think that moving that money from the K-5 towards athletics, I don't think it's going to come into play with losing any money from OFCC.
Okay, but so just as a, not our situation, but just from a general standpoint though, if we do move it, we can never get it back from the OFCC, correct? Because we're expecting to reevaluate the projected students and everything and possibly get a, higher amount in the end. So I'm just asking the general question, the rule, if we move it to the athletic project, it's gone forever, correct?
No.
No, that's not correct. It could be tracked as a contingent LFI, meaning if there's funds left in the co-fundable project that they could fund that then. It's basically just going to be an LFI at this point.
Yeah, it's LFI, you're not getting co-funded for, you're taking on a portion of.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to find out. If we move that to the athletic, then that 500,000, it becomes 500,000 we spend. If it's in the K-12, we could potentially.
No, it's still utilities on your site. And if for some reason the K-5 came way under, absolutely, you would be able to say those utilities are still servicing the K-5 and that whole fund should be co-funded, but I don't think we're there.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I misunderstood that from the other view. Or from somewhere. And does the items in the alternate that we put in an alternate column, do those get bidded as well?
They will be.
Okay, and if they're not in the alternate column, they're gone forever?
That's what we need to determine which of those items, once we determine a path, then we can take a look at which one of those items you want to have an alternate cost provided for.
Okay,
So would you recommend creating?
Concerned about today, I'm not so concerned about which items are or are not in that alternate list. It's just more the path. Which is the path you want to go?
gotcha.
Eventually, though, we'll probably have to create a priority list from those alternate items. Would that be correct, Laura?
That's totally up to you.
Okay.
It might be easier for you all to agree since you have some time before the bids come in to say which one is our most, if we have the funds, which one has the higher priority for us, for you.
Thank you.
Laura and Glenn, so let's say the bids come back 5 or 10% higher than what we're expecting. I know we have some contingency, but it's probably not enough. Let's just assume it's not enough to cover the bids. What do we do at that point?
We take a look at, we can take a look with the contractors. Is there something that they're seeing that there could be a less expensive way to do it? That we, you know, cut some minor costs. Many times that's what you can do in working with our construction manager, how we go back and forth. What did they see as they were bidding? What's a number that came off really sky high for some reason? Is it a product that we could change to a different product? Do we absolutely last resort? Do we, you know, if something absolutely crazy happens, then we have to redesign. We absolutely never want to get there.
But at this time, you think if we approve one of the methods that you and Peterson have suggested, you don't feel that we will be out of line with what you're expecting bids to be in June?
That is the hope.
Laura, my question is, this is Lida, for the items that we have seen and that we're looking at and these dollar values, do all of the items have to be kind of a wholesale, all or nothing kind of situation? Like, for example, the hexagon lights. Like, are they all out or all in, or can we have like maybe put them in the entranceway or something and then have other light options elsewhere? So it divvies it up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We can, back to the hexagon lights and putting them just at the main entry. You know, we had 5. Could we whittle it down to just 3 and that's the only place that those are provided? Absolutely.
Sure.
We could even do that as an alternate too.
And I realize that's a lot more work, obviously, that's a given, but there's just some of these things that we think are, you know, they're a great impact, but they're not maybe necessary in all areas, and that could save a lot of cost by not putting them everywhere. Even like opening windows, for example, there are a lot of areas of the building where there are great egress, where students can probably have multiple passive egress, but other where maybe they don't, where an opening window maybe makes sense.
Well, I will let you know right now, every classroom has 2 means of egress.
Aside from windows.
Without the windows. When they exit their door, they have 2 means of egress, 2 doorways. So I know that the exiting a window was something that you had talked about as possibly a safety item. But you don't do that today. So that's something you'll have to decide, is that something you do or don't want?
Okay. Well, that definitely, I mean, that changes your opinion, right? When you're looking at a line item like that, that's like, you know, thousands of dollars. Knowing that safety issue is a little, that changes your mind about that safety issue, right? Potentially. Okay.
Well, there's still only one door out the classroom though.
Yeah.
2 exits out the back door. Just every so often I'll wait.
But I'd also want to reiterate to our viewers or listeners that it's a pretty conservatively designed building right now. So I don't want people to think that we're going to the extreme with extravagant items. It's not at all. You see pictures of it, it doesn't look very fancy like other buildings look. So we've tried to really do what we can do to stay within our budget. Unfortunately, it's probably one of the worst times to build a school building.
Correct.
I think people that are going through home construction or even just doing home remodeling projects are seeing those same issues right now. So, sorry, Mr. Eel.
So Laura, this is Julie again. I don't know if this is the appropriate place to do this. I don't know if we're at the opinion part yet, but so based on what we discussed a couple days ago, and I talked to a couple community members, so I created an option C because of, you know, the list of doing all those little line items that we kind of didn't care for that. And also a lot of them would be permanently removed. Some things we could do in the future, like the lighting changes and cabinetry and stuff like that. But the infrastructure things like changing the pipe size and the HVAC handlers, I'm probably not saying that right, the air handlers and stuff like that, once they're gone, they're kind of gone, right? Because you have to redesign the building. So based on that, what I did was I kind of scrubbed that list of things down to using that criteria, right? If they couldn't come back later on, leave them in now. And then not doing the 6 kindergarten classrooms rather than the 5th grade wing. And the reason the kindergarten was, it's only 6 rooms. The 5th grade wing was 7 classrooms plus a science plus 2, what looks like work rooms. I'm not sure if they look like on the diagram, but 2 small rooms. So we would,
Extended learning.
okay, extended learning areas. So we would lose more space by not doing the 5th grade part at this time than we would if we don't do the kindergarten part. So, and by scrubbing that list and not doing the kindergarten right now, we could give the money, we would not have to use the athletic money. We would take some money from the Fair Funding Act, that's Danny. Be a portion of that money would be needed, and then kindergarten in the future. So I don't know, I guess we have to talk about the options now.
It's like very loud. Yes, and no, how many here, that's really speaking up, that's, I'm not even sure if Laura heard that today, true.
Did you hear that, Laura? It's raining really hard here.
I couldn't hear Lida.
I said what Danny said.
So I'm looking through the list that Julie sent me.
And as you do that, Laura, can you think about the number that we received from Glenn and his folks at Peterson about the shell for the 5th grade? And do you have any opinion about how that impacts option A particularly, or option B for us, and where we end up if we were to do the shell?
Well,
I know that's a totally on the spot thing. I realize that's a typical question, but
so if we did the shell, I mean, you would have the roof, the walls, the footings. You wouldn't have any interior walls. You wouldn't have any slab. You would need to run your electric later, but we would at least get it to that point. And that allows you to finish, I guess, that section later. I know there was some concern about who to not have in this building right now, whether it's better to have the kindergarten in this building with 1st grade teachers, or whether it's better to have the 5th grade out. Honestly, the building, we can do either one. I don't know that there's a right or a wrong for the building. I think it's more what is going to work more educationally for you. If you had to do this for a while before those monies were available to build that on.
So this is Julie again. I just have a little comment on that based on when we added the 6 classrooms. So this is another reason it might be better to do the kindergarten, is even without those 6 classrooms, we still have, I don't know if you know, Justin, it's either 38 or 39 classrooms. Or Laura, do you know? If we didn't have the 6 kindergarten, there's like 38 or 39 classrooms left. And even at 25 kids per classroom, we could come close to putting 1,000 kids in that school. So presumably the first year, everybody would still fit, right? The 6 extra classrooms would buy us maybe a year or 2 after that. So it's still the first year, we might be able to fit everybody in.
I'd have to run the math on that. You're saying how many?
Well,
What-
1,000 kids at 25 per room would be 40 classrooms.
Yeah.
And we have 38 or 39. I don't know which it is because I don't remember.
Are you counting classrooms or are you counting extended learning areas?
Classrooms and the science rooms, I believe, was 38 or 39. And not the extended learning areas. Classroom science, I think there's an art room too that would have to be, that's one of the 38.
You have a music room?
Music room, maybe that was one of them. So we had 36 rooms, right, for 6 per grade.
That's 36.
Plus the extra, the big rooms.
Well, I wouldn't say they're big, it's an art room.
Well, a little bit. That were not considered not part of that 6. Because the 6 is what we added on with the LFI money. I'm just saying potentially it could be a year or maybe 2. Classrooms might not have 25, and I'm not sure we were planning on that anyway. Because we have 27 now.
Depends on what region.
Yeah.
Well, I will offer an alternative opinion. This is Lori Sebastian. Every parent wants their kid to be in a permanent classroom. And when we talked several months ago, the majority of people wanted us to put our money in additional classroom space. I know it hurts. Maybe we don't have the right lighting. Maybe we don't have the carpet or linoleum that we want. But I think we would be foolish not to find an option that gives us the most classroom space. That's what our parents, that's what our community have asked for historically. It is not going to be this high school edition. The new elementary is not going to look like this new high school edition. Maybe the pendulum.
It wasn't gonna be.
Yeah. No, and I know, so maybe the pendulum will swing too far the other way. I don't know. I just feel very strongly from my 10 years working in the district in various capacities, whether PTO, whether music, whether athletic boosters. I would like to see us spend as much money as we can on classroom space. And I am perfectly fine spending from the athletic budget because it's going to benefit the athletics, the athletic portion of the facility project. I'm okay using a portion of the Fair School Funding Act to find that. So I just want to throw that out.
Now, I have to add that to date, when we talked about the plans for this building, our philosophy has continually been more classrooms, more space. I'm really struggling with reversing that philosophy and cutting classroom space. I'm struggling with that. I mean, I understand we're talking about bare bones. I completely get that. But I think we just need a sound structural building with as much space as humanly possible. And, you know, we can fund or fundraise for, you know, extra things, you know, later. I'm just struggling with it, I think. And perhaps some of that is I may not fully understand what some of the items are. That's totally possible as well. Completely possible, but there's some of these line items that I might think are one thing and they might be something else. So as we go through that list and decide what's an alternate and what's a now, I get that. But I just think that philosophically and from our strategy so far, we continually talk about space, classroom space. The teachers have asked for space, community has asked for space. And to date, that is what we have decided to give. Even if it's a shell for now, that we kit out later, I think that's important. I also think when we talk about, you know, leaving off a grade level or not putting the grade level in the building, I really struggle with that grade level being kindergarten when it's so much easier to have 5th grade combined with the middle school from a transportation standpoint, from a maturity standpoint, from every other thing I can think of. It makes the most sense to have 5 through 8 be together for a little while in the short term.
From an educational standpoint, you would want to look at 5A building intermediate and then have 3K.
It just means, even if the kindergarten rooms are gone, it doesn't mean the kindergartners wouldn't go there. It just means that they might be a first.
I would
mean,
not recommend,
not
I would not
really.
recommend separating kindergarten from the rest of the-
Kindergarten rooms have a specific requirement requirement under OFCC, don't they? Like, don't they have to have restrooms?
Room size is larger, they also need to have restrooms.
So if we don't do those rooms, then we don't, like,
Well, this is a temporary.
That's why they're more
this is temporary,
expensive.
right, and it can come back in the future. So, I agree with you about the philosophy and everything, and the classroom space doesn't bother me as much because, as I've said all along, I think the 6 classrooms only buys us a year or two, and then probably 1 grade's gonna be back here anyhow. If the growth continues, if the economy tanks, then it's a different situation. But I agree with you about the philosophy, but what concerns me is when we started going through the list of items that we were cutting, a lot of those are school infrastructure items, building infrastructure. They're not lighting and carpeting. Those things, I agree with you, I can live without those kind of things, and they can always be done later. But if you change a pipe size from 4-inch to 3-inch, a main line, you cannot go back and undo that. That's not something. Same with the air handlers. I don't know, Tom, do you remember some of the other
Yeah,
items that you were concerned
A
about?
lot of was that HVAC side, yeah, you're right. Main lines, yeah, it's decisions you had to make, and once you made that decision, you're stuck.
right,
You're not gonna go back and change it.
and I would just like to see that the numbers, work out and shuffle out to be if we do the shell and the main infrastructure items. And then cut the nicer lights, et cetera, et cetera.
So, okay, so I can tell you that. If we do the shell on the 5th grade, you mean?
That's the only one I remember for, so.
So right now, basically, the list, well, first of all, we can put athletic money back in there if you guys feel you want that back in. So that's one thing.
And I want to reiterate that athletic money isn't just moved there. The athletics is going to benefit from all that infrastructure. They just weren't billed their portion of it. So I
So-
don't want anybody to think we're robbing athletics of money.
But we are. So Laura, let me clarify though quick. So if we would do that, and I'm okay with it, that's what's decided.
Mhm.
But then our fundraising efforts is gonna have to go up even higher than we currently already have. Is that
We're
correct?
still $500,000 or $400,000 under budget.
400 after that.
So if it's $500,000 shifts over, then that requires us to raise an additional $500,000 to do what we wanted to do in the stadium, right? On top of what we were already fundraising?
Yes.
I don't know. We came in under budget, 400, like,
I guess I'm asking a question. I don't know. I want to make sure.
So the under 400,000 though, that money's intended to be there for the field house, right? The
Correct.
materials and everything else. So if we take money from that.
So our $1 million is now $1.5 million that we need to raise.
are we gonna need $1 million to build the field house tomorrow?
No, but like he said.
Everything else, we don't have enough bleachers right now. We don't.
Yeah, it's an underage for a Garmin Miller budget, not an underage for an overall budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
Well,
So,
I guess I'm confused. What are, if it's an underage for Garmin Miller, what isn't in there?
Well, the plans that we were fundraising for was to take our home side bleachers from 1,500 to 2,000. I mean, that was one big thing. I'd have to look at the website.
Does the stadium budget, Laura, does it include, like, are we buying materials for that field house and then we were just gonna build it? Or are we buying materials and building it?
Both.
Both.
For the field house itself, yes. At SD, you took that portion on.
That we're buying both, buying and building?
Say that again?
We're buying and building,
Yes.
just to be clear.
So Lyda, the answer to your question, if we did a shell for the 5th grade, is that
Yes.
what you're asking?
Yes.
So if we shelled that and left the list as I sent to you guys, again, you're welcome to make changes to that. And did not include the athletic money, we would have to use almost 700,000 of the fair school funding at.
Sounds great.
But we temporarily lose more classrooms that way than if we don't do the kindergarten piece. Because you're talking 7 classrooms, one of those is 4th grade, by the way. Plus the science room, plus the 2.
Agreed, but we're building classrooms that cost a lot more money to build. So it makes more sense to me. Because kindergarten, having to have the restrooms and the sinks and everything else, and they're larger, it makes more sense to go ahead and build those now.
Well, you have your plumbers on site and all that. Yeah, I would agree.
And having the little buddies together with the other little buddies, because the kindergarten and first grade teachers work together so much and collaborate. That makes so much more sense for those instructors and students to be together.
Okay,
That just makes more sense. And then for fifth graders that are gonna go on to sixth grade, they're getting acclimated to the building and those instructors are together as well. It just makes more sense to me from an instructional standpoint to do it that way.
It's not gonna be popular, but your best,
No.
your best
Not that
educational
it's-
decision is to keep your K through
Yeah.
4 together, and heck, your 5 with your 6, 7, and 8. I know the eighth grade parents or fifth grade parents aren't gonna like being around eighth graders. But I don't think you wanna put your kindergartners off on an island by themselves away from the rest of the elementary.
Right.
right, but that's a separate conversation from what piece of the building we don't do, right?
I'm just saying, I'm looking at it from the education side.
Right. I agree.
Education side, the K through 4 together makes much more sense than
Yes, agree.
1 through 5 and then K with the 6 through 12.
Right, I agree. I'm just saying, I think that's a separate conversation from,
Well, I mean, I just think even just from a community point standpoint, a staff standpoint, a student standpoint, and just a me standpoint, I have to look at that all together. That's all one thing for me.
okay. So you would be okay with giving up fifth grade space temporary?
Temporarily.
Okay. Laura, can I ask you one question? These line items in here that say, I did my job, sorry.
Get the maintenance.
Sorry, the line items that say reduce things by like $1 a square foot, what does that mean to us? Is that cheaper materials or?
Sorry, I missed the beginning. What'd you say?
So there's some line items under electrical, let me see. I think they were under plumbing. So target overall cost reduction, and then it'll be like by $1 a square foot. What does that mean? How do we accomplish that, getting it down $1 a square foot?
That's something we'll have to work through. It was an idea of let's find a way to do that. And that'll be something that we'll have to talk about. How do we get there?
Okay, and that can mean alternate materials. Alternate's probably not a good word, because we use that for something else. Different materials.
Could potentially be alternates, yes.
Okay. So I just asked that because, as you guys know, I left those in the accepted column. So that would be something we have to still do.
Glenn, I have a question, because Julie and Todd both have expressed concerns about the infrastructure, and if we go with wrong, I don't say wrong, if we go with different equipment, what that means for the long term. In your opinion, since you're the expert, construction manager expert, what do we most need to do on those lists that we've moved to a different system?
I'm not sure, because anything on the finishes, you could always upgrade later. And later may be as the project develops and contingencies come back, or if things go well, you could upgrade those before we actually put them down. Or you could even do additional upgrades later on in the future. But if you change your infrastructure itself, the masonry walls or the steel beams or whatever, yeah, you can't change that later on. So I would concentrate in getting the infrastructure right, and then you can always do other additional upgrades later. Laura and her team, we did look at changing the whole roof framing structure out. Typically, joist and metal deck is the way to go. And precast planks are typically a lot more expensive, but they're actually comparable to joists at this point. They're not quite as economical as joists, even as expensive as they are right now. But we did try to look through all options and all materials to see, are there better ways and ideas out there at this point.
It's like, Julie, one of the examples you used was reducing the mains. On this, there isn't a line item unless I'm not looking. They chose not to do that one.
I think it's called.
Yeah, but they chose not to do it unless this.
Reduced means it's 38.
Was it the HVAC main you're talking about, the 4-inch?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so that really, talking to the designer, they had just put a placeholder in for 4-inch. I think with the calcs and stuff, I don't think they need 4-inch, but that was just one item they were gonna check back with.
That one we should accept. On option B, we had that in as accepted because in furthering the design, we looked at, we don't need all of that, the piping to be 4-inch. And so some of that has been reduced. So you should take that one.
Which one was that?
That
38.
was the reduced mains.
C38 on the C list.
Okay. I thought that was reducing the line in the main line in the school, something smaller.
It is. Once we get in the building, the rest of it can reduce. So that's just a function of us continuing to design the project.
Okay. So if that's the case, why then the money from the fair school funding would go down to 637,000. And then we can, which is the end of the first year.
Want to remind them what we received, and we received like 1.2 million.
1.4.
So I think it was like 712 the first year, maybe, something over 2 years. Yeah, it wasn't exactly split even yet, right? But close, 600 something and 700 something, and added up to about 1.4 million.
And that's only for 2 years.
Correct,
They'll readdress it, reevaluate it after 2 years.
correct. Which
They
is
may
why
do
a
more,
lot
they
of
may
us-
do nothing.
Absolutely, which I think is why a lot of us are looking at it as not an ongoing, long-term expense to add to ongoing, long-term budget. I think,
Just wanted to let people know who you
yes, for sure.
that are not aware of.
Same for me.
Well,
Wasn't it?
838 would still be-
Okay, so
That's it, that's the item, so I put that back in, so basically anything we add or remove right now changes the fair school funding money.
Well, we can choose, or when Tina gets here with our approval, we can choose whatever that amount is. I think we're foolish to get this much into the details. I think what we need to do is to decide whether we're gonna do part of the structure, all the structure, or what we're gonna do. And I would like to hear from Danny on this.
I hate the fact that we've advertised this as a K-5 building for a couple of years now. Here's this plan stage. Now we're talking about it becoming a K-4 building. And yes, I agree here with kindergarten aspect. They shouldn't be in a separate building. There were aspects of Julie's option C that I really liked. I still do. And I see yours, that we've already voted to add the extra rooms. And it was to my memory, it was the very first thing on the community survey that we did a year and a half ago or so. And yes, I'm a firsthand experiencer of cost of steel right now. From buying angle irons. If we have a shell, when is it realistically going to be outfitted? When is that money going to show up? Where is it going to come from? When the CFAP kicks in 8 or 9 years, we're going to sit a shell around for that long being unused? Am I correct in that?
well, maybe more money will show up from the state now and then, or maybe if the prices come down, it comes back to you, I mean, or maybe not, we can't bet on that one.
Right.
I mean, one thing when we talked about the 5th grade pod, like having the shell, when we asked about that a couple days ago in the meeting, the one nice thing about that is that the commitment is there. It shows a commitment. So I do like that aspect of it. That, that we haven't, right now we're in a bind because prices are up, right? And yeah, we added those extra classrooms, but it just seems that that's the cleanest cut, is to start by pushing those out a little bit rather than making all these other small cuts. So, or smaller cuts. But I did like the idea that it shows commitment, that the shell is there and that it will be finished when we can raise the money or get the money for it. Like I said, the only reason I kind of flipped to the kindergarten was because when I talked to people, it was just the number of classrooms. If we shell the 5th grade pod right now, then that would likely mean that the 5th graders would move over to be with the 6th through 8th graders earlier.
I don't have the numbers in front of me right now. If the district would decide to do all the cut option, money wise, where would that still leave us within the budget?
Option A.
Correct. How much short would we still be?
Or option A leaves us where?
Well, we kick in,
I'm just saying, not kicking in anything. We did the cuts.
oh,
What would that leave us short?
well, $1.5 million,
Still $1.5 million short.
because that's what we took from the athletics and from the fair funding.
Okay, just wanted to remind.
Yeah, $1.5 million.
So even if you did all of that, you don't have enough money in the Fair School Funding Act to pay for it all.
No, we do. We have to take $1 million of the 1.4.
But you said $1.5 million.
And 500.
And no,
Oh.
and take the athletic 500,000.
Well, 400,000, because I think if we did option A, I think Laura's document shows that with 500,000 from athletics, $1 million from fair funding, we're 115 under.
115,000.
Right, so okay, so yeah, 400,000 from. Yeah, that's.
Or
true.
900,000 from fair funding and 500,000
Right.
from athletics.
Whichever.
However you divvy that up,
So 1.4 million short is the answer, not 1.5, because you're right, there is a negative balance on that.
I mean, you want some cushion, I would think, so I'm fine with people to say.
Yeah.
Let's face it, you don't want to go to zero.
And just for clarification's sake, today we get underneath budget. We could still potentially be under budget or over budget again once bids come in. So this is just a potential temporary fix to a long-term problem.
And that's another thing, when I talked to some community members, they actually raised that point and said, well, what happens if we do have to do this again? Now what's left to cut? We've already made some cuts that are on an alternate list, as Laura said. that
You're
we
gonna
made.
have to look at space next time.
Yeah, you're gonna have to look at space, so.
I don't know if you're. Because you've taken out everything else if you got it.
And as you mentioned, I even agree with this, and you guys know how I am on bells and whistles. I think it is a pretty bare school, I mean, basic, no bells and whistles.
It's very nice. It's just not fancy. You're
It's
not
not
gonna have
fancy.
glass and you're not gonna have courtyards with fancy rocks. You're not gonna have any of that.
Speaking from experience, the displeasure from the community in the building we just built was in the fact that the structure actually changed somehow. I mean, this community was promised a building that could be added onto, that was set to everything but shells. That, we were talking about how much money we'd save by putting a shell rather than building the building. Can we do this? And the structure and the layout of the building was such that we would do that. The fact wasn't that we promised this much and didn't get it. What really kind of slapped the board in the face was the fact that when it came back, we had no ability to add the classrooms that we had promised would go at the end of the hallways, because the structure had changed and nothing had been done. It would take in refacing that whole end and starting, it would have been like building a new building. So I think if the shells or even the foundations, the fact that you are taking something away that you know goes there, will say a lot towards what the board is committed to. From my opinion, or my experience.
I'm okay with the fifth grade shell. I'm happy to switch to that. A little more money out of the fair school funding, but we still have a little cushion there in case some other things come up.
And then what are we doing with the options? Are we still gonna do all the are we still gonna leave most of the A options out, or?
Most of them would be back in.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the ones that are infrastructure that are a big deal, I think we really need to make a sound. In my opinion, honestly, we haven't made a vote yet or anything, but I think we need to keep the building as structurally sound as possible. I think, kind of like what Glenn was talking about, you can't really gut the actual integrity of the building.
And I don't think they've done that
Yeah.
with these modifications.
I mean, it would still work and it would still function, but would it be as strong and as long-term functional as it could be? I think we want to keep those things that make it that as much as possible and keep the maintenance, as smooth as possible, and as quality as we can. I mean, it's gonna get used and hopefully it's gonna get used for decades. We want to make sure that it's set up for that.
So the list that I sent in option C basically did what you just said. It kept the things that were structured to the building, but mostly the things that you had concerns with, except for those ones that I just asked about that said we're gonna cut $1 here or there. I left those in the accepted.
And things we can't change later.
Things we can't change later, right? So the lighting and carpet and cabinetry, things like that, those are all on the accepted list. Right. The accepted listings are cut. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a little backwards. Because if we do get money or prices go down, we can always do that. And those are last minute items too, right? That, not last minute,
Right.
but
You can change cabinetry.
but you can change, yeah, things
But
like
the
that.
heating
So that's kind of how I did the list. It may not be completely right. That's why I said if you guys want to add or remove things from what I did, that's fine with me too. That's what I did for the criteria of what option C, what got accepted.
I will say the only comment I see on YouTube is from Stacy Mullins saying that she agrees with you, Lori, on classroom space. Mr. King, do you have anything you'd like to add to the discussion?
Yes. Let me fix my camera. There we go. So a couple of questions that I had that I may not be looking at the most up-to-date spreadsheet that everyone else is, and looking at the funding cuts. But if we do the shell, we're just doing some of those things in option C, and then just adding some more general fund, fair funding dollars to that to make the appropriate amount of cuts.
That's what it sounds like.
Am I tracking that correctly? Sorry.
Yes. I believe so.
So what portions of the school were you thinking of just utilizing the shell? In the spreadsheet I have, it just talks about kindergarten, which you clearly discussed how that wouldn't work. So what are we talking about, and what areas of the school we not completely build out?
I believe one of the areas that was identified was the 5th grade. So you have the shell of 5th grade, and then the interior would not be finished.
No.
The clear opposite side of the building.
Right.
In the front.
So what is the
You still have the exterior finishes, just on the interior, it would be open.
what is the definition of the shell? So will it have floors and walls?
Or you want to describe that to them, what it would look like? Or Glenn?
So,
You could.
now on that line item, it mentions that you would have the roof structure, the walls, the exterior walls, not the interior walls. Basically, you would not have access into that portion of the building. It is not occupiable space. You would not have a floor slab because you would want to be able to, when you go to build it out, know where you're going to be putting in your utilities, your electric, your water lines, and things like that. We would not extend that out everywhere to where it needs to go. You would have foundations, but no slab.
Okay. And so that if we chose to go that route, then on our list of options would be building out as much of that space as possible.
On the alternate list, you mean?
On the alternate list.
We would definitely have that as an alternate to finish out the space.
Okay. The last, probably the most unpopular item or strategy would be delaying the stadium project and utilizing the funds there now and potentially go back to voters to replace that money. Is that an option?
The only question that I would have in regards to that, and it would obviously be a treasurer question. From my understanding in conversations with our former treasurer, I don't believe the money could be utilized that way. I thought it was clearly identified in separate pools of money that had to be specifically used for those specific projects. But I don't want to say that with 100% conviction. I would have to do some checking, and I'd also have to talk with Mrs. Hageman as well on that.
Right.
That makes sense what I'm trying to describe.
Yes,
I don't
sir.
think $3.5 million could go towards the 28.5, and I don't think the 28.5 could go towards the 3.5.
And the way that it was, we funded the money in relation
Yeah,
to Todd's
but I would have to check, but I think that's how Brennan described it to me during the process.
Okay.
In his conversations with the bond council. So it would probably be a conversation with Jennifer Blazer as well.
Okay, yeah, because I think, our ultimate focus is trying to maximize the space for students' education, the critical core components, which is classrooms, then looking at those other options. So that's why I wanted to throw that out there as well. But I think more than likely, it appears that our best strategy then would be to look at a shell, maybe not of the entire fifth grade, but the amount that's required that we can potentially match with the school funding, if that makes sense. So instead of a whole fifth grade wing, we wouldn't do potentially equal to the 6 classrooms and some other cuts, utilizing kind of a blend of A and B to equate some of those dollars. Does that make sense?
I will say one other thing to that, though. If you try to do half of the fifth grade wing, you gain extra classrooms, but you don't actually bring back the whole fifth grade class. So I don't know if educationally, if that works for you to bring half your fifth graders into this building, whereas half is in another building. And it also, we were looking at what the square footage that we could not build and still allow for means of egress. So if I try to add on half of a fifth grade wing, I don't necessarily have doorways. We'd have to build something different to make that happen that you may tear out later to then finish out the project. That makes sense.
It does. It does. But I was just looking at, if we could clearly build reduce as much as least amount as possible, maximize everything we can build out, that's still going to be less on the back end for us to try and raise and complete. And we may not even use it initially until that other funding could assist. So.
Right. And I totally hear what you're saying. I'm remembering all the other things that were on the alternate list as well. And I'm kind of thinking, I don't know. I mean, we'll have to kind of look at that list too, when the time comes and make decisions on what makes either filling out half in the fifth grade, or if it makes sense to try and put those things back in, you know?
Yeah, correct. I think we get the overall strategy. I think moving forward, then all the rest will probably play out with regards to what is our estimates and what are we able to maximize on that alternate list potentially.
Absolutely. I think we also need to try and, get in touch with who our grant warriors in the district are and see what things on this list might be eligible for grants to help fund. Some of the things, maybe technology type things, or, maybe even furniture things. You don't know what there might be available for grants as well.
Mr. Gilbert had a question or a point to add to. As far as the,
You're talking about having extra money left over. Maybe we do the underground and pour the slab. And you
Yes,
just
sir.
have walls and
Yes, sir. That's a great
interiors to
idea.
finish,
It's a great idea.
assuming. that's there.
So Laura, can we put things on the alternate list as line items like that?
As which item?
So like what Rick was proposing to maybe do the plumbing and whatever's needed to have the slab in place. Rather than having the whole finish it off line item.
I'm not sure I understand your question. I'm sorry.
So rather than having the line item as an alternate to finish out the inside of the shell, which would be the $1.1 million, to have two line items, one that says pour the slab and do whatever's necessary to get to that point, right? Plumbing, electrical spaces, electrical lines, whatever, and then finish off the walls and inside. Can we propose the alternates as two line?
The only reason for keeping the slab out is if there is something else that, say 2 years from now and now you're ready to finish it out. Oh, but we really wish we would have been able to change something or add something, and now you have the slab that's in the way. I really don't see that as being a detriment that you don't have the slab. But yes, I mean, we can add, some additional things to finish it out a little bit further along, yes.
Okay,
For sure. I mean, you don't know. In time, we might decide that that's gonna become special ed classrooms, or we might put something else in there that we're gonna have different plumbing and electrical needs, and, so I get that. That makes sense. Yep. So, where we at?
Lori, what are you thinking?
I'm not sure I followed that conversation, but hopefully I'll figure it out. Since Tina's sitting here and she's gonna be taking over as treasurer Monday. I'm just wondering, I know you just kind of getting your feet wet and all this, but I'm wondering, you listen to all these conversations and if you have any.
Well, I guess my first question is the timeline for your decision making. When is what's the deadline for us to decide today? You must decide either it's option A, B, or C, right? Okay, because my primary concern is promising the school funding money, because there are some line items in the budget bill that require that money to be restricted. So like you have economically disadvantaged money, it's going to be now DPIA. That's going to be, they're discussing how are you supposed to spend that, and it's going to be restricted, and how much of that is in that 1.4. So how much can we actually promise of that money? They eliminated the school wellness and success funds from this last biennium budget, but they're saying that's restricted in the new funding formula. So are they gonna still put that in a separate fund? So that's where my mind sort of went. I was like, and a lot of those things won't be fully enacted until October 1. So we won't know all of those things. There's never a win-win situation when you have to start cutting things and you made a promise. But from an educational standpoint, I completely understand keeping it a K-4 kind of building and having the shell, so.
what's your knowledge as far as potential use of the ESSER dollars for construction?
You can use the ESSER dollars for construction, and that's an additional 460, I think, right? It's so how that plays with our stay in school or return to school plan and how we can make that work. So that's another avenue to look at. We can certainly look at that. Because I know you can use it for HVAC items
Sorry,
as
Rob, I
well.
just had to throw that one out there.
Oh, that's okay.
Did you say something different, Rob?
Well, I mean,
Step
we've
on your
had
toes.
discussions with our ESSER funds already about purchasing Chromebooks and our infrastructure upgrades,
Mhm.
but no dollars have been committed. I'm just trying to put all options out there for whatever available monies that we have. What
Right.
could be utilized, and some
Right.
flexibility. It
The
wasn't much,
problem
but
with ESSER funds is that, they're federal funds, and so the Davis-Bacon rules apply, bidding, there's different bidding requirements
the
and
prevailing wages.
the prevailing wages, yeah. So that may further drive your cost up a little bit, yeah. So, that's the problem. There's always an obstacle, so I was just curious as to what I'm assuming the special meeting was because you needed a decision today.
Yeah.
And Rob's in charge today. But, it's a difficult decision either way, but my only concern about the fair funding is there's still a lot of unknowns that are coming with that 1.4. And I don't want to obligate the district and not be able to meet those required expenditures in those areas, so.
Do you have a gut feel that those restrictions are gonna be high percentages of the 1.4 or?
They should not be, I don't think so, but I haven't really dug down and looked. What was the economically disadvantaged portion for this year?
Thought it was 20, wasn't it, for recruitment and learning?
It sounds in line with.
Yeah.
Yesers.
No, and you're economically disadvantaged on the student, on the, what used to be called your SF. Yeah,
What our percentages are?
yeah,
I think they're 16%.
okay. But we
You're
had to
considering free
spend,
introduced lunch, correct?
yeah,
16% is all right.
but you had about 25,000 that had to be economically disadvantaged spend.
Wasn't that high?
It wasn't that high,
You want to restate your?
I was saying it was under 15.
okay,
Well, if we have the vote,
yeah.
we're gonna have to make a decision, but we're talking offline because Danny needs to go soon.
Okay,
So, sorry.
no, that's okay.
And see, I remember on that 460, that ESSER's 20% is kind of go to
It's
their.
recruitment.
You're okay?
Right, you've
So,
got
I
that
would see, but
20%
that's
set
90.
aside, correct?
$90,000 right there.
Yeah.
Well, and I would. Where
This
it
is-
is-
Absolutely,
There
absolutely.
may be things that are like, no, this can be cut.
Yes, and because some of those, I agree,
Right,
because some of the
okay, you're
conversations
related.
like the rock and all that stuff, I didn't quite get all that, but yes.
Because
But,
that.
but basically what you're saying is leave in most of the things from option A. And the shall. So option C, but shall instead of elementary.
Sorry, we're just summarizing Mr. Nealon's viewpoints amongst ourselves because he needs to leave for a prior obligation.
I would also add then, if I heard that correctly, is the safest position that we could go forward is utilizing the shell method, because that's going to dedicate less of the funding that we're not 100% sure on what we can and can't use it for. Is that correct?
I would say that's correct, and in addition to that, it does not include the athletic money. So if worse really came to worse, we could put that 500,000 back over, and we'd be down to roughly $137,000 out of the Fair School Fund Act. Which probably would be okay. It gives us a cushion, that athletic piece. We're trying not to take it now, but it is a cushion.
Okay, so that seems to put us at less risk for not being able to
Yes.
back what we're throwing forward with funding, and reducing risk to not being able to do it, but also allowing the opportunity to potentially fund alternates with some of that fair funding money if it's allowable to be used.
Or the potential for future bids to not be pleasant.
Hey, Julie, one item though, real quick.
Yes.
I get what you were doing and I thought about this for a really long time, but I think you have the numbers for shell incorrect. So you have it shown as that would be the cost for the shell, but we're trying to deduct the finishes. So you can't say you're going to deduct The shell, you would have to say that you're accepting deducting the finishes, and then we are providing the shell.
I think you're right.
Okay, so that'll change.
So let me tell you the new numbers.
That changes.
Yeah.
Yes,
significantly,
yeah. 500,000.
Spreadsheet.
About 500 or 600,000.
Yes, Laura, thank you. I just added that today, so nobody else actually has that on their sheet. Because we didn't get the numbers in time. I sent this last night. So that would put our fair school funding up to over almost 1.2 million.
Or we take some from athletics. I mean,
Or
it
we
still
go back
puts
to the
it,
athletics.
puts us in okay. I mean, Tina's gonna have to look at all this when she comes, because there may be ESSER funds, there may be I mean, I don't want to use operating money, but again, we'll just have to see. We're hoping you come in with your magic wand, Tina, and.
Only thing I would say about ESSER, and I'm not saying no, because I brought up the option, but I think if we're gonna go that route, which I'm okay with, we'll have to know by August, what's that date, Rob, that it has to be in for?
24th.
We'll have to know by August 24th, because our budgets have to be in our CIP,
Okay.
CCIP to get our funding.
Right.
So that can't be something we sit on for a while, if that's gonna be an option.
So if we put the athletic money back in there, just under 700,000 from the Fair School Funding Act, and we lost the cushion that we just talked about, and now we're gonna have to find some place to get, as Justin said, another 500,000 for the field house. Might be another reason to cut it. Well, the elementary was 2 million versus now.
Kindergarten class?
I mean, sorry, kindergarten, yes. Was 2 million
No,
versus
I
1.1.
feel like we are still okay. I mean, remember, we had 1.4 million in fair funding that we can still look at. Hopefully, we won't have huge percentages of that have to be allocated elsewhere. We still have potential coming from ESSER. I mean, and we can look at it, we have to, a little bit of operating if we really, really need to. So I think that that's okay.
I'm not as comfortable as you said, because I'd like to have some money in case some things go wrong. We're still gonna have the old building, which as you know, things fall off occasionally. And other emergencies, so I'm just not as comfortable with you. I'm not in disagreement.
It's not ideal.
No,
It's
no,
not
they're
ideal.
not. They're not perfect choices. Right. I mean, Scott, I remember when we did this and, we wanted to put extra classrooms on and it was about money. And in hindsight, would have we built a shell? Absolutely, right? I mean, if you had known 3 years later, even when we opened, you were gonna have that many students, you would absolutely do a shell. I mean, I'd love to do the classrooms too, but there's just not money, so.
He was up against a different.
Julie, do you have any comments or feedback? Just I mean, it's a tough decision, whatever.
No, I definitely think that K4 should be together.
But the good thing is, we have classroom space for a couple of years if we get this built.
Yeah, you're essentially gonna have. I don't know what the numbers are gonna be enrollment wise, but you're gonna have a substantial portion of that building that's gonna be sitting there open. You're gonna use some potentially for overflow space if high school eventually has to flow over into the middle school area and the middle school area has to flow over into the elementary. But you're gonna have a substantial number of classrooms that could be utilized for a couple of years. It's not perfect, but we also would be foolish to say that we don't know that we're gonna have potential enrollment issues moving forward. It's not been an issue that's new, like, so. I don't want to separate grade levels, but I would prefer to do it that way than to not have kindergartners with the other first, second, third, and fourth graders.
Services too.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think that logically educationally makes sense. I think your fifth graders can handle being with the 6, 7, and 8. There's many school districts that have 5 through 8 intermediate buildings.
Yeah, and there are a lot of other things to consider as far as special teachers to accommodate for those classrooms, like that off balance of those kids are now being here. I mean, it's a trickle down effect, but unfortunately, there are a lot of things, that's what's spinning in my head. Okay, so how are the special teachers going to accommodate for those, that fifth grade class, which is now over here? And there's gonna be, an overload of
It's not
5,
easy,
8.
it's not easy, but at least we have a couple
But
of
yeah,
years to
I
start
mean,
having those discussions
right.
and planning.
There's a lot to,
Yeah,
Yep, you've got administration, you've got transportation to work out. I mean, it's an
yeah,
endless
there's a
stream
lot
of things
of
to think
things
about.
that are gonna
for
be
sure.
affected.
Absolutely.
but those decisions, in my opinion, are much easier to make than not having the appropriate infrastructure and when you run into major issues with the building.
For sure.
Right.
Once
The
you do
priority
that,
is space.
you're done. And you can't fix it.
Todd and Justin, before you make final decision, are you comfortable with just doing the shell and finishing it?
That was my opinion in the meeting the other day that we had.
Mine as well. I mean, like I said, it's not ideal, but you guys have brought it up several times. You're at least trying to show some commitment. It's not perfect, but
Hopefully, with all your connections.
Glenn, is there anything else you'd like to add in regards to the structure of the building or any of these items or anything like that that we need to be aware of?
No, your decisions today are not final decisions. The hard decisions will come when all the cards are turned over, and then you'll know exactly how to play them. But we just really need a path. We have to show the state, the OFCC, that we have a path to reconcile, so we can keep Laura and her team moving. Regardless if kindergarten goes or stays, if the 5th grade goes or stays, I think we need to have Laura and her team still design it. And then we just put a hashed line on the drawing saying this part over is alternate or this part is not. So I think there's options there, but we do need a path to move forward today. And it won't be the final decision. That final decision will come later. As far as being optimistic about the future, I had a subcontractor 6 months ago hold off on buying some metal product because he thought it was too high. And for 6 months, he watched it go up, up, and up. And his problem today is worse than it was 6 months ago. We did meet with the joist and deck manufacturer, trying to get a feel for those people, if they're seeing any relief coming. And their predictions right now are 3 to 10 years till this settles down on their end. So I don't know. I don't know. The crystal ball is broken, so I don't know what to say. We'll do the best we can and try to be diligent about it to move forward.
So Glenn, do we need to worry about that line item, the joist and deck budget, because it's blank in the spreadsheet? So
no, right now we're actually, like Laura said, we are actually carrying a high number in that already. So I would hope it wouldn't go too much higher, obviously, but we got our eye on the market and we'll keep track of it.
Thank you. Mr. King, any parting thoughts?
I think we have dissected it down to a clear pathway moving forward, looking at the shell process, and then getting down to those hard decisions once everything comes back. But at least we're establishing a pathway, and we're putting in an opportunity for us to continue to finish out if needed down the road, or if we can, later. And it also gives us a little bit of options of also something else that could be cut in the event of that prices are even higher than they're already projected. That, okay, so the next thing we have to cut would be the shell, which would give us room to cut. Right now, looking at the other options, there's zero to cut. So this also kind of gives us a backup plan on top of a backup plan, if that makes sense, by doing the shell.
So option C with the shell for grade 5. And we're gonna accept C38, Laura. So on your sheet, and then can you also take a look and see if there's anything else like that that you may know more about? The things that were in both lists, A and B, I left in the accepted list. Because I know you talked about the rock and stuff like that. So just make sure there's nothing there that is a huge mistake. If you could, please. Make sense?
Yeah, I didn't see anything else.
Okay.
Through it real quick.
So what about the sinks, eliminating the sinks?
Would have to write a variance to the OFCC for that, and then it would go to their variance committee, and they would have to.
Right, so I rejected that in this version, but Lori was saying, did we already write that variance or?
No, we need to write that variance. And the committee would meet again in 2 weeks.
Did you write the variance for the windows? Did we hear back on those? Because I think she rejected all of that too. The blinds.
No,
windows.
the blinds, I think
No, I'm sorry. Trying to think which, I submitted one of the variances. I'm sorry, I submitted the variance on the sinks. I'm waiting to hear back on that. I did not submit the variance on the windows yet.
Okay.
so that even the kindergarten rooms won't have a sink either, because it says K-5. Is that what we want?
Right, it was for all grades.
Okay, so if we get that variance, that'll be $100,000 off the bill.
And the thing is, with the variance, like we discussed at the last core meeting, just because you go for a variance, if OFCC says that they reject the variance, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that when you go to get funding, that they would look at that and say, you didn't do this scope of the project, like to our expectations in the design manual. So that one particular item, you would not get co-funded. So like for the classroom sinks, if you decide that that is something you do not want, period, no matter what they say on that, if you choose that you don't want that, that would just be an item you do not get co-funding for. That makes,
You won't get
Sorry,
co-funded at
gotcha.
CFAB.
So I thought the teachers really wanted these though.
They do. We're just trying to find ways to cut money out of the budget. I would prefer not to do that. I'm just trying to do, this is the death by 1,000 cuts.
But if she already submitted a variance and they say yes, we don't give us the variance, even if we do it.
So if they reject your variance and you choose not to do it, which you have that option, you will not receive credit for it once your money comes up for the CFAB portion.
Okay, what if they accept the variance and we do it anyhow?
You will get the funding with the co-fundable portion.
We still get the co-funding even though.
If you do it, yeah,
even
if
though
you do
there's
it,
variance.
you'll get the
Okay.
dollars later, but you're gonna spend more money in your budget.
Okay, because this version C includes leaving the sinks in.
I didn't see it. I don't know what C is. I didn't even look at it. I was pretty busy.
It's in your inbox.
Yeah.
It's over there since about 3.
And I think Julie and team, I think if we really take out that big cut and then work some of those little smaller items, utilizing Laura's knowledge and kind of drive the rest of those remaining few items. I think the big piece though was the shell and how much we were putting in, and then identifying those other small things down the road. Is that correct, Laura? Is that appropriate, or do you need to know fine facts all the way down right now?
I think we just need to have a main path forward, whether that was square footage or like option A, we're just gonna try to take everything that we can possibly cut. Having that main path forward, I think, knowing where you're at with C, if that's the path, I think that is what we need for today.
Okay.
And we'll work out the fine tooth items like you were mentioning.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have to vote on it? Is that?
I think we should.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we proceed with option C, which is the shell, with some options rejected. And Peterson and Garmin Miller will go back through the list and do all the details and we'll move forward.
And I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Lori and seconded by Lyda. Any discussion?
I think we've had a word.
I have to ask. Ask Jacob.
I'm not trying to make light, I just, at this point.
Mr. Wanamaker, please.
Yes, Mrs. Sebastian,
Yes.
Mrs. Mansfield,
Yes.
John here, and Mrs. Reese.
Yes, and Jacob.
You can't,
Oh, you
can't
can't
vote. Unfortunately, they changed some.
Yeah, they
rules
changed
right now
After
about
June
being-
3rd.
Yeah, sorry.
Back to normal meeting, yep, I know, it makes me insane. It was so handy.
He can't vote, but he can run the ambulance. He can't do it. He can run the- yeah.
And I would just like to say thank you, Laura, Glenn,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Tina, Julie, Scott, Todd for coming tonight. I know it has been a lot the last week for a couple of us, so thank you for your time.
And thank you, Laura, for putting the options together for us and Glenn and all your input as well. I appreciate that so much. Julie, thank you for putting together your option C, having that other spreadsheet to kind of pick and choose a couple options. That was very helpful as well. This is huge for us and it guts us to have to leave things out. Honestly, it'd be great if we had just all the money in the world to do everything that we want to do. And hopefully we'll find some grants to kick some things back in. And hopefully the bid package will come in and we'll be like, oh my gosh, look at all this money. So we can just fingers and toes are crossed, honestly, for the whole 9 to come in great. But thank you very much. Appreciate you so much, more than you'll ever know.
And thanks for answering all the questions of the meeting.
Yeah.
I know I ask a lot of them. We don't do, does anyone see a need to go to executive session?
I didn't know if that was added for the work session, the email that you sent. Is that-
Yeah, that was for the work
Okay,
session.
I wanted to make sure it
I didn't
wasn't for-
know. I thought maybe there was some other personnel issue.
I wanted to make sure it wasn't for tonight.
It can't be tonight. Building.
No, it was on the release,
It was on the release.
Oh, it's on the release.
Yeah.
but you don't have to go into it.
Right, so
I included it.
I think there was a misunderstanding.
Okay.
Just leave it at that.
Yep, no need for executive.
Okay, so, Ahmed, motion.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Lyda, we have a motion by Lyda to adjourn, Lori seconded, any discussion?
No, ma'am.
That's fidgeting in my
Mrs.
seat.
Mansfield?
Aye.
Sebastian?
Yes.
Mrs. Reese.
Yes.
What time is it?
It is
6:28.
6:28.
No, I'm good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, Eric, Laura, and Jacob. Appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. There you go, Glenn. Promise.
Thank you.
Oh, this is-